Welcome to Worthy Women Wednesday. Today we have Jennifer Spivak here, and I'm so excited to hear from you because you make such an impact on women and they're using their voices, especially in this world right now where we don't always get the chance to use our voices. And so I'm excited to hear more about you. You know, Forbes called you the conversion queen. What an amazing compliment that is. And also, where I connected again with you was when you shared your story of domestic violence in the New York Times. And so I'm really excited to hear a little bit about that part of your story, now that involves everything. But I just want to point out that because the show is amazing at supporting survivors to know that we can absolutely rise up and create the life of our dreams. And so thank you, Jennifer, for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so let's start off with your story. Usually we spend around like 2 minutes, whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your story, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, awesome. So, my story really begins about 10 years ago. In 2010 and 2011, as you know, and, as was the sort of focus of this New York Times piece, I found myself in a very violent and physically abusive relationship. There was also a lot of emotional abuse. I mean, kind of like all of the different things that you hear. It was all packed into one super fun relationship. And it's almost like in a way that the real story actually begins once I left that relationship. I was rather fortunate that it was only about a year of my life, and I was able to get out and kind of move on, all things considering, in a fairly easy way. And the only thing that I know how to do after something bad happens is look at, like, what am I supposed to learn from this and why did this happen? And so I kind of immediately threw myself into advocacy work and volunteering with different domestic violence organizations. And it was like very apparent to me that the experience that I had was very different from the experience that other women are having. They were having a lot more challenges in terms of getting out and moving on with their lives. And I learned over time that a big aspect of that was because I had access to finances. So I just happened to, it was just coincidence, right? That I had $1,500 in a savings account prior to that relationship that my abuser did not know about. And that was the money that I used to leave, get a new apartment, and sort of start my new life. And so what I learned is that, lack of access to finances ends up being one of the main reasons, if not the number one reason, that women either stay in these kinds of relationships because they don't know where to go. They don't have the money to support themselves. They could end up in a shelter or on the street. It's also a number one reason why they leave and then end up coming back. And so I just remember having this moment of like, $1,500 is the difference between life or death, like really, really at that level. And so, from that moment, it was just really very clear to me that my whole mission and vision and purpose on this planet would be about putting more money into the hands of more women, because we do know domestic violence is incredibly prevalent. And beyond that, look, access to money for women means never having to be beholden to anybody, plain and simple, whether it's a physically abusive relationship or not. So that became my entire focus. And I use that as the mission and vision to build my all-female Facebook advertising agency, where really our focus is growing the businesses and the finances, of course, of our female entrepreneur clients, so that they, are able to be financially empowered and never need to be beholden to anybody.
Yes. Oh my, that's gold right there. And so many, I'm so pumped for this. I have so many questions. But in that, one thing that you said is the money piece. I hear that all the time when my clients feel like, I would if I had the, I would if. And so that's really amazing. And going even back further, you said, you always were that person who went through something and then you learn from it. So how did you become that person, or did someone teach you that? Because that's not usually the reaction that most people have. So I'm curious where that came from.
I honestly am not sure how to answer that question. It does kind of feel like it is just how I am. I've always been very predisposed to if something bad happens, how can I make it good? Like, a very different example that is in the same vein for me is when I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And like, you know, I should have been, right? Like sad and all of that. And I just remember like, I was like, ooh, I'm going to milk this. I'm going to use this to my advantage. Like me and my family would like never wait in line in any restaurants because we'd like do this whole skit to pretend that I had a low blood sugar if there was like a long line. Like it's such a different example, but it's just, look, like something bad doesn't have to be bad. Like I have a, you know, very sort of, I guess, positive outlook. And I've always just felt like, what's wrong with putting a positive, beneficial spin on everything that happens to you? Like, why not?
That's awesome. That is what an amazing, like, you know, whether your parents had that idea or whatever it was, like, or you had that idea of, you know, making sure you're at every restaurant and on top in front of the line. Because of that, you know, it's an amazing skill to have. And obviously you're using it today too, of like, hey, how can you turn around and use your voice to advocate for others? And that's huge. So to go into your story of the assault for a little bit, something that I know that my audience is gonna be able to relate to. You talked about in the New York Times when you shared your story that, you know, it was like, at first it was cute. Like he was like, oh, answering your phone, or like he wants to get to know my friends. And so can you just share a little bit of that progression? Because some people in my audience might be listening and being like, oh man, that's me.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't even know at first because we're just like, we as women are really, we just want to love so much. And it sounds like you have that positive, like if anyone can, you know, turn someone around, it'd be you, right? And so can you just share on that really quick?
Yeah. And I think it's so important, you know, this may not be the case for your listeners, but you know, something that I get asked a lot, or that is like a difficult topic to approach that a lot of people don't understand is, you know, how did you like end up in that relationship? I think people assume that like you go on a first date and he hits you and then you just keep like, that's not quite how it works. Like abusers are basically grooming you from day one, whether it's conscious or not. And so that obviously means that it feels good and fun and enjoyable in the beginning. There's this slow progression of sort of them exerting this coercion and control. And the fact of the matter is, abusers only abuse to the extent that they need to in order to maintain control. So there are many people that may be in what we would consider an abusive relationship, but they're not, you know, experiencing physical abuse because the psychological abuse sort of keeps them so controlled that the abuser doesn't need to escalate it to the next level. So it often is these other versions of control, financial abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, you know, isolation. Those are really the things that first come into play before anything ever escalates. And you're kind of like primed to where the first time there is physical abuse, it almost feels like it, this is weird, like it was like the natural next step because you've been kind of like getting primed, you know, for weeks and months and sometimes even years on end.
Yeah. Oh, I love that point that you just, you know, it doesn't look the same for everybody. And I think oftentimes like we compare ourselves. We're like, I have so many women who come to me and who are working with me. They're like, well, Aleesha, I haven't been through sexual abuse like you have. And I'm like, oh no, that's okay because whatever your experience is, it's valid. And it doesn't always look the same, like you said. And oftentimes we see it in movies. Can you just speak because in movies, it's a certain type of way. And so when you look at movies, you're like, well, that's not me. So I'm okay, right?
Yeah, 100%. You know, and I remember too, like it was maybe a couple months into the relationship where I noticed that I experienced fear around like leaving. Like I would think like maybe I don't want to be in here anymore, but I like had like fear or concern around what it would be like to leave, but it didn't look like domestic violence. And so it didn't cross my mind like at all, that like going to a domestic violence organization or the police was like even an option. Like I just remember thinking, what would I even tell them? Like I don't have the big bruise, like I don't have that, like is this abuse? Like is he just like me? Like I didn't know or understand to even identify that that's the relationship that I was in until there was a physical component.
Yeah. And that's such a good point because like you said, they're professional like actors at some point. They know what to say to get you to stay. The moment you're finally like, no, I'm not going to stay. They say something, they bring you flowers and whatever. It's like, oh no, they're changing, right? And so when was that moment where you're like, I do not have to take this and I'm leaving?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a moment, and I don't know if it maybe was a moment, it might have been more like a series of moments, but I think there was a point in time where I realized that what was happening might impact my life long term. And it really was as it relates to my success in business and my finances. That was always something that was a big focus and something that was very important to me. And this may sound kind of weird or messed up, but like, it was almost like, hey, if it was just like impacting me emotionally in the short term, like that's something that I could handle. But this might actually impact like my long-term success, which was such an important thing in my life, like almost like a switch flipped in me where it was like, hey, whoa, like that's a whole other level. Right now is fine, but like I've got long-term big plans for myself. And like this person was like calling my job and like potentially like messing up, my ability to be successful in my career, taking all the money that I made. And I just remember thinking, I'm not going to allow that to happen. And so once it became clear that this was something that could have these very long-term impacts on things that were so important to me, I shifted into problem solving mode and, really began to figure out like, hey, what are we doing from here? Like purely from a perspective of self-preservation.
Yeah. Which is, again, that's huge. You even had that thought, right? Because sometimes we're just like, well, no, it'll get better. It'll get better. He said he's working on it. He said he's working on it. He said he's working on it. And how many times are we going to say that? And so I think like what you said just now is like actually figuring out what does that look like long term? Like, is it your kids that are going to be affected long term? Is it your financial? And ultimately, all of us, it's going to affect our lives no matter how you look at it, but it's really figuring out what's going to make you move, right? The financial piece made you move. Maybe someone on here is like, well, that doesn't seem real to them yet. But it's what makes you move, right? To get out of that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so going forward, okay, so you said you got out, and what was like the days, weeks, months afterwards, like directly following? I know you said you like switched the flip and learned from it. But yeah. What was like the hard days, the good days?
It wasn't that hard is the honest truth. I have these memories of like the first couple of days and weeks in like my new apartment and like what felt like my new life, and like the simplest things, like just like, having a drink by myself after work or like going to the gym and it like not being a problem was just like so delicious. And I was just like having so much fun, just like having like the freedom over my own life because I didn't have that for so long. I remember, it's funny, it pops up every year on Facebook. I think a couple weeks after I left, right, where Facebook reminds you what you posted. And I posted something that was like, the relationship wasn't for you when like the hardest thing about being single is figuring out how to zip up the back of your dress by yourself. And like, I just like, that was the hard thing, right? That was the hard thing that I was like, oh man, I have all these like dresses that I wear to work and I can't zip them up myself. But everything else was just like, wow, this freedom is amazing. I think I am somebody that, again, like there wasn't any emotional processing or anything. It was just like into problem solving mode, into what's next mode. I ended up, having to testify in front of the grand jury. So there was all this involvement with like the DA in New York and this court case and all of this stuff. And eventually he, pled guilty, and that was sort of, that chapter was closed. But it mostly felt good. And then there were different moments, over the years. Again, this was 10 years ago, the first relationship that I got into, right? Like a lot of things that were like new spaces to navigate and things that came up. But ultimately, the freedom was just so amazing. It was so obvious to me that was the right choice, and it felt so good. So it's not that every moment was easy, like learning to be in a normal relationship again. Took a little bit of adjusting. But that also, it's like weird to talk about now because it was like a decade ago. Like even like one of my coaches recently was like, you really don't seem like you have any trauma left from it. And I'm like, I really don't, like, at all. Like, not only do I heal well from trauma very quickly, but like, look at how I've used this. Like, it just always kind of feels like, I'm pretty sure like I came out ahead. So I like mostly feel pretty good about it.
No, and I love that perspective. And ultimately, like, you might be listening to this and being like, how in the world is she that positive, right? Because, but you had that choice to allow that to ruin your life and to allow that to be the trajectory of your life, or you had the choice to do the opposite and learn from it and be like, look, I got out actually really amazing. And so all of us get to realize that, like, we get that choice. It's a choice of the matter. And it might not feel like it right now if you're listening and you're just getting out of it or you're still in it, but take like that energy and that belief that Jennifer has in you and that I have in you, to know that you absolutely can do hard things. And so you spoke about this, getting into relationships. How? Because one of my clients, she was like, "Well, he doesn't hit me, or he doesn't do the." And I'm like, "Is that the bare minimum now? Is like that? Is that supposed to be good that he, like, you know?" And so, how do you navigate relationships again and just letting somebody in again after that?
Yeah. Again, all these years later, it's just like not even a factor for me. I do know that, like, in my first relationship after that, there were a lot of sort, like, if we were, even if he raised his voice, like, because he was watching sports on TV, right? It didn't even have to be at me, right? Like, even if it was, like I would, my body, like, I would have these, like, like, I think that actually was the part that took the longest to get rid of, like, the physical sensations, the, like, automatic, like, body trauma response, because, like, my brain knew I was safe but my body did not. And so those things would come up, and it was just really important having a partner that, like, I could be open about, and that, like, like, the type of men that date women when you're the relationship after the abusive relationship, God bless them. It really takes a special kind of man to understand that there are going to be all of these nuances. But these days, 10 years later, that was I think about my abuser, and I don't really have any hard feelings towards him. He was a really messed up dude, really sad life. His life, again, I don't really know about it right now, but is, like, still probably fairly sad. And that was just one man. I've had so many experiences of amazing men. I'm, like, a super feminist, but God, you gotta love a good man. And it's just not something that even comes up for me anymore.
Yeah, which is amazing, and we all get to that point, right? And yes, like, you get to find someone who's open and understands that there are going to be some growth that you get to do afterwards, and there are triggers that come up, like you said, like the loud noises for you or whatever it is. My fiance and I, he was the first person that I really shared with, and so, like, we've been together for the last 5 years. There was, like, huge amount of growth, and what he did was he stuck with it. And so you do get to find somebody that sees you as valuable because of your past experiences and not broken. Because after going through domestic violence, like, did anyone around you say, it sounds like maybe not, but did anyone around you say that you were broken, or that this is always going to be a problem for you, or it was your
No,
fault?
I don't think so. I don't have any memory of that. I definitely felt that that was a isolated incident with a specific human being that never properly learned how to be in relationship, how to process feelings and emotions. I had plenty of experiences before of amazing human beings, and so it yeah, it always kind of felt like that. And yeah, I don't think I ever felt really, like, broken around it. It was like, maybe temporarily, maybe there were, like, some pieces that had to be, like, reconfigured.
Yeah.
It always feel like a moment, an isolated moment in time.
Okay. Yeah. No, I love that, because yeah, so often that's not the case. And so, like, to know that you did have that support is really awesome, because we get to find that support, and ultimately, like, you found that support. And we get to choose to have those people in our lives or not in our lives afterwards. So I love that. And so going forward now, just, I love what you do. So I want you to, like, talk a little bit more about what you do and for who, and how important it is for women to make money. and to have their own businesses and to go forward?
Yeah. So for the last 6 years, I have owned an all-female Facebook and Instagram advertising agency. Obviously, yes, we like do Facebook ads, but our approach and our context is really, hey, Facebook ads are a tool, and they're the tool that we use because they work really, really well. But we are so much more than just media buyers. Really what we are doing with our clients, we're becoming their partners in profit. And our eye is on creating a system that puts them in control of their own growth so that they can make as much money as they want. And I mean, ultimately, that is what's possible with Facebook ads. Like, for example, I use ads for my own lead gen to get clients for the agency. And, I've been able to perfect a funnel over the last year or so that more or less guarantees every time I spend $600, I will close a client. Now, granted, I'm selling a high ticket service, so those numbers work all day long. And so what that allows me to do is be 100% in control of my own growth. Our plan is to 3x our revenue this year compared to last year. I'm not like wondering how I'm going to do, like I have the roadmap. I literally just 3 times the ad spend, like that's it. And so I'm in complete control of how much revenue we generate, which means I'm in complete control of my life.
Yes. And I love that, because so in starting my own business, you're like, I'm going to do this to support people and all this over here, right? But you don't realize how much it brings up in you. For one, it brought up a lot of my own healing journey, continued healing journey, but it's also, it's so much of a reflection of who you are in your business. And so I love that you put that out there, that you get to be in control of the business aspect, because oftentimes, so even growing up for you, what was the money conversation for you in your head? Like, was it talk about it, don't talk about it? What was it?
Yeah, definitely maybe a little bit like don't talk about it. But I felt very empowered by money since I was really little. Like when I was 5 years old, I created a business called The Business, because I was obviously very creative. And I would like put on these like carnivals in my backyard, and like everything was monetized. Like coming in was monetized, every booth was, and I just like loved this idea of like to me, making money is creating something from nothing. Like nothing existed and I turned it into into income, which then can be used to like do whatever I want. So I've always just felt very attracted to that and empowered by that. And entrepreneurship for me was never like a question. It was just like, when would I start it? But it was always something that would happen. And yeah, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is we live in a capitalistic society. You want to have total control over your own life, like money is a really good way to do that.
Absolutely. And so if somebody doesn't have that mindset of money is in its exchange of value, right? You found something that's valuable in your backyard, even the circus, like everyone loved coming. And so in return, they paid you to be there, right? And so it goes down to like that, like simple things we can do to serve people and to provide value. And so can you speak on just like a tool that people can start maybe transitioning their mindset on money? Because I know a lot of people maybe don't have that mindset.
Yeah, I feel that it feels to people when they're working on money mindset for the first time easier said than done. But like my offer is like, I don't think you have a choice. Like it is a little bit of like a matter of life and death to like step into this and take on this aspect of your life, like as though everything depends on it, because it does. And like really what I mean by that is I don't believe there's a version of just waking up tomorrow and having a different money mindset, right? Like we all have like stories and ideas and interpretations when we were children, generationally. I mean, God, like it's so deep. So having a different mindset, again, it may not be easy, but what I notice is that what a lot of people do is they get very stuck on talking about how challenging it is, and they just stay there. And they just stay there and they just stay there. And it's so hard and and all this stuff. And this is my experience. And all of those things are true. However, there is an opportunity to like, again, take it on as though your life depends on it. So I didn't just like wake up and have good money mindset. I decided 10 years ago that this is something I would work on day in and day out. And that means, reading books and buying courses and following people. And, I cultivate it as something that is such an important aspect of my life, like just like I would anything else that's really important to me. So it's really something you can choose to step into and take on and just work on every single day. And ultimately having a good money mindset and, you know, really like believing in and cultivating abundance and being able to manifest things is simply just a recurring choice day in, day out. And sometimes you have to remake that choice like 50,000 times a day or even an hour. But that's it. Like there is no other path to it. Like that's it.
Yes, and a lot of what we've said is a choice, and it doesn't have to be an easy choice because we can do hard things. And so realizing that it's a choice, and then none of us necessarily, like from a young age, maybe have the best experience of money or whatever it is that you're working through. This doesn't have to do with money. This gets to be with anything you're working on. But you get to learn. There's so many books out there, and we have so much access to knowledge right now. And so that's something that you're wanting to work on. And if it's something you have an issue with, then it is 100% something you're going to work on, right? Like you're just saying, like this is 100% something that's important.
Yeah.
Because going forward, money is something that could actually save your life. Like for you, like that 1,500 got you out of that abuse. Because so often we make an excuse for why we can't go and do something.
Yes.
And so moving forward into like, and talking about like entrepreneurs and everything, I know that women come to me all the time. They're like, well, how did you even start becoming a coach? Like, how could you do that? What about the 9 to 5? And so how would you encourage women to just like go out there and build their dreams right now?
Yeah, you know, something I always talk about, like when you're, you know, new to starting a business and what like my first year or two of business was like is be scrappy. Like plain and simple, you know, and it's funny, like looking back, I didn't have an LLC or a website for like years. Like years, like well past the time when it wasn't that I couldn't afford it. I just was lazy and didn't feel like it. And it wasn't ultimately impacting my ability to make money. Like I was 100% laser focused on doing whatever it takes to generate revenue. Nothing else mattered. I didn't care about like having the fancy whatever, the branding, the logo. Like those are not the things that drive revenue. So it was 100% scrappy, laser focused, making that first 100K. That's when you have a real business. And then from there, you can start investing in the other things. There is always somewhere to start. There is always something you can do to like take the next right step. And, you know, the only way to get to where you want to get to is to start with something. I mean, I don't know, like that's again, it's the only option.
Yeah, because I think some people like look at maybe they're like Jennifer and Aleesha can start their own business, but that's not for me because we, you know, we compare ourselves. We're like, it was easy for them. No, it was not easy for either of us, right? We felt the fears and we did it anyways. And so can you like speak into like, it's okay to feel the fear. It's okay to feel like you just said hard, but we still got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know any entrepreneur that doesn't. Can I curse on here? Is that allowed? Okay, I was gonna say it's important for the story, so I was like just double checking because sometimes I'm on podcasts and they're like, "Could you not?" I have a friend who like has this idea of whether it's creating like a book or something for entrepreneurs called "Fuck Do I Suck." And it's basically like like every single one of us, and it doesn't matter like what level you're at. Like I have the same like thoughts of like, fuck, do I suck? That I did like in year one as I do now as a 7-figure agency owner. Like that it doesn't go away or change. Like it just doesn't, right? It's just sort of like a part of it. And so I always offer that like the idea of like wanting to resolve that first before you do anything will have you like basically stuck in the same place forever. Like get used to that feeling because that's like your friend now that's probably going to be there. Some version of it will be there forever and it will be quiet for long periods of time as you become more successful and then pop back up again. Surprise. Like it's just part of it. And like, you can either like move forward with it or not.
Yeah. And I love it because I love how open and vulnerable you are because exactly, I think there's too many maybe influencers or coaches or and entrepreneurs that are like, yeah, I got to here. It was the first 100K and it was like, they don't talk about the struggle, right? And stuff because, you know, like how many times did you look for a 9 to 5 job when you're like, fuck, do I suck? You're like, should I get a real job, whatever people say? And you have that. Have you had that happen where you're like, Okay.
I don't know that was ever me.
Wow.
But again, like I knew entrepreneurship was my thing. Now, did I like consider, well, I think my version of that is like considering, taking a project or a client that like ultimately like wasn't a fit. You know what I mean? Or like somebody, who was looking for somebody, to do the work, but wanted more of like an employee, those types of things where I'd be like tempted to like take what felt like the easy path. Uh,
Yeah.
but I've always been driven by like freedom, really. It sometimes feels like a little bit corny, but that's like my like big picture, like, core value in life. And I was on a panel yesterday and they asked all of the panelists, like, what's your favorite thing about entrepreneurship? What's the best thing about it? And I referenced this, it's something I heard Tracy Ellis Ross say. I think she was like giving a speech at like a Glamour award show. And she said, my life is mine. And that always like really resonates with me. Like I've always been driven by like I get to like create and design my own life. My life is mine. Every minute of every day to a certain extent is by design. Like there is, to me, like nothing that feels better than that, and I will fight like hell for that. Not that I really need to anymore, but if I had to, I would, because
Yeah.
nothing feels better to me than that.
Yes. Yes, we all get that freedom too, and that's what I think is really important. That you get to find, and we oftentimes, like I said, we judge other people, or we compare ourselves, or we have like the imposter syndrome. Or we're like, well, we had to do it just like Jennifer, right? And you don't have to do that. And so, like, who are your clients? I'm sure you work with a broad amount of people. Like, who are your clients? You're like, I can't believe she made a business out of this, right? There's some people you're just like, goat yoga. That was one of mine. I was like, goat yoga. And then I went to it. And I was like, I see.
Yoga. That's so amazing. Yeah, I mean, look, we have like clients in all different industries, but something that I tell all of my clients and that I would tell anybody is, just because it's something that's working for me or something that I'm doing, I never tell anybody like, well, that's how you should do it, or that's the way to do it. Like, I actually believe that a big part of my success in business is because my sort of North Star, what I use to make decisions, is based on like a literal, like checking in with like my body of what would feel best. And so, like, operating from that place for each unique individual in terms of like what feels good. How would you like to do business? How would you like to market yourself? What would you like to, ultimately be able to make money doing? And like that as the guiding everything is ultimately, I think, going to make every single person way more successful than trying to do something like somebody else's.
Yeah, because for one, you're gonna have that feeling of imposter syndrome, no matter what you choose, and you get to choose out of that too. Yeah. At the same time, if you're really, really like being like, hey, she's doing this, I'm gonna do this, and it's not gonna be satisfying because that's not who you are. Yep. And so really like looking at what questions can they start asking themselves if they're ready to start a business.
I mean, I think anybody could be ready to start.
That's a hard question.
Right? I mean, look, it's like, is there something that you really enjoy doing that somebody else is willing to pay for? Like, that's enough. You start there and you figure it out as you go. That's my perspective.
Yeah, you figure it out as you go. That's what I loved about you said that earlier too. It's like, no, we don't have to have the website, the LLCs, all the stuff, because we get in our heads that everything has to be perfect. Because oftentimes you're scared of failure, and especially after going from abuse, you're like, oh, is this going to happen again? And then you translate that to every part of your life almost. And so like the scared of failure part comes up a lot. And it sounds like you probably have either had clients who are like going with you, and then all of a sudden they're like, slow down, and they're like, what? I'm scared of failure, or whatever the conversation is with them. And so how do you support people through that?
Yeah. I can't really speak for my clients. One thing that I do know about myself as it relates to that conversation, I feel like I actually created the opposite interpretation. Like, as somebody that's in an abusive relationship, literally your job is to like act like and preserve like everything's normal, like on the outside to everybody else, and like always be like cool, calm, and collected, and like all that stuff, while like literally like you're like living in hell, right? And so it's like like seeing how effective I was at that was like, oh, like I could actually like basically do anything. So I think it actually removed the fear of failure. That doesn't mean that there's never any fear, but failing, I don't know. That ultimately isn't really a thing that scares me. I don't actually believe that there is such thing as failure. Like, it's just like, oh, interesting. I wonder, like, let's just say, for example, my whole agency like fell apart and I like lost on this would never happen. But let's just say that it did. Like, watch, a year from now, I'm going to be like having a whole platform and mission and vision of how I like destroyed my agency and rebuilt. Like, I will turn anything into.
Yeah, no, exactly. You'd be like, let's do it. Let's go. You'd be excited about it. You're like, well, here we go.
Like, how am I going to flip this and turn it into money and inspiration? Because I totally can.
Yes, you totally, any situation. And also what you said right there is how incredible it is that we've, gone through some kind of abuse or some kind of life experience that was painful, right? And you turn that around and you still created whatever you're creating now. And it doesn't have, you got up. Awesome, you got up. But during that abuse, yeah, most of the time we have that mask on to everybody else that we're okay. And then we go home and it's painful and it's hard, whatever it is. But what you just said right there is so powerful, is that, man, if you can do that,
yeah,
imagine what you can create on this end. Imagine power, because it's made you more valuable, not less valuable.
yes.
You actually are stronger. And so I hope that you guys are listening to this interview. Maybe you might even want to listen to it again, because the way that you're like flipping the switch on multiple things, I know I'm gonna listen to it again, because I love it, and you get to choose to do that.
Yes.
So what is your daily or morning routine that helps you wake up every day with a purpose? I love asking this question because sometimes people are like, I don't have one. But sometimes, you do have something that's supportive, and an audience member might be like, oh, I want to try that. So
I hate morning routines. And
asking this question, I was like, she literally flipped the switch on everything. I was like, I'm pretty sure.
That's a rule breaker, and it's literally my favorite thing. So for me personally, and again, I think it's so different for every individual. For me personally, it began, I thought I was supposed to, or I should have this like expansive, abundant, meditative journaling, like morning routine. And it started to feel like a trap. And again, freedom, my favorite thing, right? And so it became a have to, and those things don't fit in my life. And so what I do attempt to do as often as possible is just create expansiveness in the morning. Now, sometimes that means like waking up early and then just like petting my cat in bed until I feel like waking up. Other times that might mean like going outside and sitting on my balcony and like doing a meditation. Like, I might do some of those things, but ultimately it's just about like having like the best experience possible and as much ease as possible in the morning, as like the space between like me waking up and when I actually go sit at my desk to work, but never through the lens of a have to, because ultimately for me, that doesn't support me.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. I talk about that all the time, because we don't have to do these things. And so what do you get to do in the morning? Like, if that feels like a restriction for you, absolutely. Yeah. Because we're like, okay, we have to, that saying, it's like millionaires wake up at 5 a.m. And it's like, and then underneath it's like, and some millionaires don't. It's like, whatever it is, it's like we have in our head, we have to do a certain thing to be powerful, to be strong. But it's actually asking yourself, and you talked about it earlier, talking to your body and being like, does this feel right to me? And so some people like might not even understand. And I think I'm even like growing in this area of actually feeling it in my body more. So can you speak on like how you actually like, do you sit down, or you calm? Like, how do you even be able to recognize what your body's doing?
It's another one of those things that's almost difficult to explain how you can get better at it, because it was just like a lot of trying.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
a period of time. And I think like it's one of those things that it's just words, like checking in with your body, until all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I felt it this time, right? And it was just like doing it all the time, and like having, coaches that I work with, for example, like, oh, so where do you feel that? And I was like, what kind of question is that? I don't know what the hell you mean. Like, what? You don't feel things in your body like that? Like, that's a yes, right? But then just like continuing to do it, continuing to like attempt. And then all of a sudden there was just like this contextual shift almost of like, hey, I think I felt a thing in my stomach. Like, wait, hold on, and then you just like get better at it. I think that's it. There were so many times, like even just a couple years ago, where I was like, I don't understand what that means, and now it's just like, I feel, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I can check in myself in half a second. And I just have this like deep, like knowing and intuition around like kind of all things in terms of like what I need and what's the best decision for me and all of that stuff. I am a manifester, in human design. So that definitely is like my like natural way, so to speak. But it was just a lot of like boring practice until suddenly I got it.
Yeah, and what you said there, you were like, you were open to it. You were like, someone said like, where do you feel that? At first you're like, what are you talking about? Right. But then you're like, you know what? And now you have to do this too. Sometimes I'm like, okay, no, I don't get to judge, because it's like, we always try to like, think of the worst possible, not worst possibility, but just like, you're like, how would that even help? Right. And you just said, you're like, no, I get to listen to what she's saying. And eventually, yeah, you're like, oh, I feel better in my stomach. And so it's not overnight again. All these things.
It's totally not, and one of the things too, like even just I'm like reflecting on this as we're talking, I've always been incredibly coachable. And I think that that is a huge piece of why my life looks the way it does, where my success is at. I have always been super open and just like obsessed with personal development, like wanting to know more and being somebody that was like, at least I used to be like kind of like naturally critical and resistant, which is kind of weird. But having that like curiosity and always being open, like, maybe I don't agree with that 100%, but is there something for me in there? And I think that curiosity and the like coachableness and being open, really led to just like so much learning.
Yeah. And it's so funny that you said you're critical because it's like seeing you now, obviously I'm like, oh, but Ed Milet actually said this too. Do you know who Ed Milet is? He's Ed Milet. He's a motivational speaker and has a podcast. But he said he's like this motivational speaker, and he's like, actually, I'm really negative. And it was like, what? And exactly, it's like, you get to learn like these new tools, and you get to take the ones that work for you, and you get to be open. And so, are you saying that you didn't do this on your own and that you had a coach?
Oh my God, I have the amount. My CFO, she's always like very nice about it, but she's like, so I don't know that I know anybody else that spends as much as you do on personal development, but hey, if that's like your thing, I'm like, okay, I hear you. I got to bring the cost down. Got it. She's so nice. But I am like, I'm nuts. Like I have multiple coaches at a time. I invest in training programs, workshops, spiritual retreats. Like that has been an obsession of my life for the last 6 or 7 years. And, I continue to deeply and aggressively invest in those things.
Yeah, that's huge. No, I figured you were doing this, but we get in our heads that like we have to do this on our own, whatever it is. But we don't. We get to have support and accountability. And a coach, exactly as what you said, it's someone who's maybe gone through the same similar experiences that you can take what you want to from them and to grow and to learn. And also, can you speak about what it felt like to actually financially invest in yourself? Because I know for me, that was like one of my huge parts of my healing journey was like, oh, I'm actually worth this $1,200 or whatever it was a month. Like,
I just took baby steps. I remember the first time I invested in a coach that was $1,200 per month, and it was like terrifying. My like most like recent investment was like $100,000. And it's just like, it's so like seeing the levels, right? And I couldn't have just started with like $100,000 investment, right? But it's just starting somewhere. There's so much information out there. There's like courses that you can buy for $99. Like, just start somewhere.
Yeah, start somewhere. Yes. Because that first $1,200 I paid too, I was like, every month I'd be like, oh, like, I cannot believe I just did this. And then I was like, I'm completely worth $1,200 and more. And so really realizing that and realizing that there are different ways to invest in yourself, ebooks, courses, whatever it is. And so, yes, we get support. In that, I would love women to connect with you. And so how can they connect with you? I'm going to post your links below, but like, what do you have coming up that they can get involved with? Any ebooks, anything like that? I would love to make sure my audience knows about you.
Yeah. So, unsurprisingly to probably nobody, the place I hang out on the most is Facebook. I always have to connect with people over there. Jennifer Spivak. We've got my website, and I don't really do lead magnets because I don't like them. Because the way I really market my agency is like, hey, take it or leave it. I don't really need the freebie seeker. So again, that's just a personal approach that really works nicely for me. But I totally, love to connect with people on Facebook.
Yeah. So you're ready to actually take your business to the next level and actually use your voice and get it out there more. You get to connect with Jennifer. Like I learned so much in this interview, and I'm excited for people to connect with you. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.